Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning webinar series. I'm Chloe Tetro, the coaching lead here with ReadyCare. For this morning, we're going to talk about the lovely topic of conversation. So rather than just your kind of average run-of-the-mill chit-chat, we're going to be looking at deeper conversation, the kind that makes us feel seen, heard, understood, and more importantly, connected. So a lot of us are constantly communicating. We're communicating through emails, messages, social media, ping, 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 all day long. But how often do we have very genuine and meaningful conversations? Conversations that might make us feel lighter, help us to see or process our own emotions, and essentially deepen our relationships with other people. So in the UK at the moment, there's an initiative called Time to Talk, which aims to encourage open conversations about mental health. So while this talk isn't formally part of that campaign, on our side, we're looking at how talking is powerful, and whether it's with a friend, colleague, or even a stranger, the simple act of talking can shape our mental health, emotional resilience, and even our brain function, which I'll get into shortly. So what we'll cover today is how meaningful conversation impacts mental health, emotional regulation, and stress reduction. We'll look at the role of conversation in strengthening relationships and fostering deeper connections, essentially. So it's not about the amount of pings that's sent, but really it's about that depth that is happening within that communication. So we look at some of the ways to make conversation more impactful and fulfilling for yourself or for somebody in your life that you feel might be a little bit isolated, a little bit lonely, and could really do with a kind of deeper side of conversation, but you're not too sure where to go with it. So we are in this kind of era of hyper connectivity where we're always constantly plugged in. But research actually shows we're having fewer deep, meaningful conversations than ever. And I think for anyone who is old enough to remember, life before the internet, what it was like to not be constantly in communication, in connection, inverted commas, connection. There is a difference in the level of conversation that people have. I remember being at a bus stop recently, and an older gentleman pointed out my phone was dead. I have to say my phone was dead. Pointed out that everybody was on their phones around, and that he missed being able to have a chat with people, which made me quite sad to hear. But I can see that really being the reality, particularly for individuals that might not partake of things like media. So to start off, let's have a quick look. And if there's ever questions and comments, please pop them into the comment section. And that goes for anybody watching back as well. Thank you for clicking. And if you do have questions, even if it's not live, you can pop them into the comment section and they'll come up in the YouTube recording of them. So the old brain during meaningful conversations. So one of the most profound ways that conversation benefits us is by helping regulate our emotions. When we talk through our thoughts and our feelings, it's not just about releasing tension, but we're actually activating brain processes that help us to manage our stress and build that old word that's thrown around a lot, build resilience. What does resilience mean? Resilience is essentially just a kind of catch way to basically say how quickly do we bounce back from setbacks, how quickly do we learn from them, how our ability is to withstand difficult and challenging moments in time. So that's what I mean by resilience when I say that. So there's a UCLA study found that simply naming an emotion, i.e. I am feeling anxious, for example, reduces activity in the amygdala. So that is the part of the brain responsible for your fear and your anxiety, as well as lots of other things. I don't want to be giving the amygdala, poor old amygdala, a bad name, but that is where these stress and fear centers reside. So it reduces that activity, just naming the emotion, particularly if they're emotions you're finding a little bit difficult, by up to 40%. That's nearly half. That's nearly half of that uncomfortable emotion, particularly that anxiety, feeling low, feeling overwhelmed. That's one I've suffered from quite a lot myself. If we're able to say that, there's that old kind of saying, a problem. Bear with me with my sayings. A problem shared is a problem halved. So just naming that emotion, research has shown reduces the impact of it by up to 40%, which is outstanding, absolutely phenomenal amount. So talking out worries and concerns has been shown to lower your cortisol levels. So cortisol would be something that we overproduce during periods of stress. So your stress hormones. Now it does lots of different things around the body, but particularly it's triggered during stressful periods. It also increases your oxytocin, which is a neurochemical associated with bonding. So bonding to other people and feeling connected and emotional stability. So that's talking out your worries again. Not only does naming it bring it down by 40%, but it's also going to lower your cortisol levels and bring up your oxytocin. So in a particular study, people who frequently talk about their emotions experience significantly lower symptoms of anxiety and depression compared to those who suppress them. And not to be terribly sexist here, but oftentimes, particularly in Ireland, there's a huge devastating impact to male mental health, and a lot of that, thankfully, is kind of progressing in on how it would have been before, even a few decades, even 5 years ago. But there has historically been a stigma around men communicating particularly difficult emotions, and you can see there straight away with that reduction in the 40%, with that reduction in cortisol and that release of oxytocin, why it may be that, why one of the multiple reasons may be that they have historically and still unfortunately struggle with mental health a lot more than women would do. So moving on here, lads, to how to have more meaningful, hang on, I've skipped far ahead here. So stress biochemistry, we've just touched on here. So so we've just gone on to the 40%. Sorry, lads, lost my place in these slides. So when we hold things in, they don't just go away. And I mean, wouldn't it be great sometimes if they did, but they don't. So when we hold things in, they don't just go away. They get basically just suppressed, which will lead to things like physical manifestation, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, increased risk of high blood pressure, heart disease, and immune dysfunctions. So things that will directly impact your day-to-day health. Disrupted sleep patterns, of course, because when you're releasing, and I chatted a bit further on this last week, but when you're releasing stress hormones all throughout the day, it's essentially telling your body that it's not safe to go to sleep. So when you're stressed and feeling anxious all day, by the time it reaches bedtime and you're all ready to go, your body's getting all these signals that it isn't safe to go to sleep. Not only that, but there's a tendency to ruminate. And when ruminating is happening, stress and anxiety take up so much of our brain power when we're ruminating. And a thought will lead to your brain essentially matching it with the emotions that go along with the thought. When you have those emotions going around, you get those physiological impacts like we're chatting about just now. So you have your disrupted sleep patterns, which have, a massive knock-on effect on your experience of your day-to-day life anyway. But you also have higher levels of chronic stress and anxiety. And there's a difference between chronic stress and what's called acute stress. And I wish it was as cute as it sounded, but essentially it's stress that's happening for a short period of time and stress that is prolonged. So an example of acute stress would be swerving in your car because a ball ran across the road, or rolled across the road, I should say. Preparing for an exam, a 2-week preparation for an exam, that would still more or less be acute stress. Going up on stage to present your presentation, that would be acute stress. Chronic stress is when these kind of periods of stress and your biological responses to giving off that cortisol, that adrenaline, is ongoing. And we're not really built or designed to have that kind of ongoing cortisol and adrenaline throughout our system. And it does unfortunately impact our health in fairly substantial ways. People say the dangers of stress and anxiety. Now, I don't want to go off too much into that route, because I suppose we're all fairly familiar with that. And I'll go off on a sidetrack from the target of this particular talk, but there's a study from the Harvard School of Public Health found that people who habitually suppress their emotions have 30% higher risk of heart disease and related conditions. Now, that is a shocking statistics. A third of people. That is massive. You can see, having the stiff upper lip of I better not bother anybody with what's on my mind, not only will impact you psychologically, physically, but to the level of cardiovascular disease being as prominently spiked as that is a huge impact. And I suppose these things all impact not only ourselves, but the people in our lives as well. Sometimes if we're in a particular headspace, it can be difficult to think of ourselves, right? We can kind of, if we're in that headspace, our own health may not be as important as, unfortunately, during in that headspace, our own health may not be as important to us as it would be great if it was, or as we would like it to be. But it's a good kind of takeaway as well to see that health impacts won't just impact you. This is not just, something to suppress, because they will all show themselves. So talking isn't just about venting. It isn't just, we've a terrible approach, or we historically, I should say, have a terrible approach to talking about genuine feelings, particularly with the Irish psyche sometimes, where we can see it as moaning or giving out and this and that. But it isn't just about venting. It's a biological mechanism that helps us to dispel some of that stress, some of that cortisol, adrenaline, that helps to regulate not only our emotions, but the cascade effect that our emotions have on our mental health, our brain health, and essentially our physiological health. So the role of conversation in strengthening relationships. I mentioned the oxytocin a while ago. So think about the loneliness epidemic and its impact on health. And there is a massive difficulty with loneliness. I'm going to bring my slide up there because it's all teeny tiny when you see my face up. So despite living in that kind of hyper-connected digital connection world, many of us actually feel more disconnected than ever, and sometimes feeling lonely when you have, quote unquote, thousands or hundreds of friends on your Facebook account, or, several group chats going on at the same time, and you still feel like you've nobody to talk to. That can hit a lot harder sometimes. Oftentimes, I would say I've been there myself. So with regards to our statistics in Ireland here. So in Ireland, 1 in 5 people, according to the Central Statistics Office, report feeling lonely, with even higher rates among young adults and older populations. Now, I was coming into I've got a taxi this morning, and on the radio they mentioned that Gen Z have a huge spike in difficulty with anxiety, loneliness, and you'd think for a generation that's hyper connected that they should feel it less, but absolutely not. And the other thing that I'd point out within that statistics is these are people who have reported it. So that can echo out to individuals that may not have reported it. And I think of an awful lot of elderly people particularly, but not always, or people in more isolated areas that just may not have that support in there. Now, Courtney Russell, you've messaged in here. I think we live in a high-tech, low-touch society. You're so correct. I absolutely agree with you. We've lost the art of being able to genuinely connect with each other, being more conscious. This will hopefully allow us to be more authentic. Absolutely. And that's really one of the key takeaways here, Courtney, that I'd love, you've really hit the nail on the head, is there is a huge difference between talking for the sake of talking or messaging for the sake of messaging and actually connecting to another human being. And what is the impact of that? I think about some of my coaching sessions that would be of a more personal nature. So, more life coaching type sessions that I give, and the impact of just being present with an individual. And I'm sure anybody who's listening will have stories and instances of a time that we stopped thinking, what am I going to say next? And just stayed with that person. And we all have examples of being on the receiving end of that, where someone didn't give their opinion, didn't say, no, what I think you should do is X, Y, Z. They just listened. And a lot of us have lost the ability or the practice. It's more a practice thing than an ability, I think, to just be with a person and not feel that we have to prove how intelligent we are, how we have all of the answers. As human beings, and I hope you're seeing this a little bit, we're social creatures, we're relational creatures. It's part of who we are to want to speak and communicate and connect. The UK actually have even appointed a minister for loneliness, which, if you thought your job title was strange. And it's very telling that, a job title like that even has to exist. After research showed that chronic loneliness increased the risk of premature death by 26%. Again, 26% is an absolutely staggering figure. Deep conversations increase dopamine and oxytocin. Now, we're seeing this from the brain, right? I'm working our way out here. But I really want to show that this is not just a quote unquote nice to have, nice to have conversations, nice to have relationships, but it is hardwired into us to be so important. There's the Harvard longitudinal study, spanned over 85 years, found that the single biggest predicator of long-term happiness and health is not diet and exercise. It's not blue zones. It's not this. It's not that. It's the quality of your relationships. It is how, you see that in individuals that are very isolated, their health can take a turn very quickly. Depression, mental illness can come into it very, very quickly. They don't want to go outside as much. They can, hold and suppress a lot of the things that are on their minds. On the flip side, you see, parts of the world where there's huge community spirits, large families, elderly, and people that may be going through difficult and isolating times of their life, things like a divorce, things like, things that pepper throughout our lifetimes as challenging. They might be going through grief. When there is a social connection, it makes that very difficult transitory period a lot more bearable for individuals. So people who at least have one meaningful conversation a day report higher life satisfaction, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're doing life, and lower stress levels compared to those who mostly engage in small talk. So kind of the key takeaway of here is conversations strengthen your relationships, they reduce feelings of loneliness, improve overall well-being. So why listening feels good to us. When we feel truly listened to, the brain releases dopamine and that oxytocin. It reinforces our experience as rewarding. We're having a rewarding experience. Active listening can lower stress markers in the person speaking, effectively calming them down hugely. And I think I have a little slide on this, do I? My slides are after coming through all wrong. So there we go. So active listening. So it's not only going to make you feel good to do it and for the person to have it, to receive it as well. It will reduce stress markers in both of you. And in the person speaking, it will also bring their stress level, calms them down. It has a powerful effect on brain chemistry, helping us to feel connected, understood, and emotionally balanced. There's this fantastic part in the brain, or this mechanism in the brain. I'll just get rid of my slide there for a second, because it's called mirror neuron system. So mirror neurons. So two neurons mirroring each other. And it helps us to empathize. So when we listen to someone's story, our brain empathizes and activates in the same way as if we are experiencing it ourselves. So if you've ever listened to somebody who's very irritated, sometimes you can start to act fairly irritated. If you've ever listened to somebody who is very upset, you can start to empathize into feeling upset. Now, when you're speaking to somebody in your life, how do you utilize the mirror neuron effect? I'll get rid of my slide here. So essentially, why is it that we speak to children who are quite upset in a tone that's very comforting? When you adopt a way of listening that is safe, comforting, calming, non-judgmental, the individual, their mirror neurons will start to activate, right? So all of a sudden, just because you adopted a specific way to speak to them, they now will empathize. It's in our biology. They will just, without even thinking about it, they will start to feel calm. They'll start to feel safe. They will start to feel understood and not judged. It's a beautiful, beautiful mechanism. How we show up for other people has a really, really profound impact on them. So how do we have more meaningful conversations? It's not all excuse me, not all conversations create the same impact. So a few little bits that I've thrown together there for you guys that are interested. I'll find my little slide here. No, there we go. This one, I love this one. I have a soft spot for the elderly. You can probably tell. So please be present. Number one, be present. And that's something I touched on here. You do not have to have all the answers, right? You don't have to come in with something clever. You don't have to solve their problems. You don't have to think of the next thing to say. Just let yourself be still. Put your phone away. Even having your phone on the table reduces conversation depth, because we are like Pavlov's dogs. We've been trained to be on the lookout for a message coming in. Put it away. It won't bother you as much. You'll be way more able to be present. And that's touching a little bit to your point there, Courtney. Ask open-ended questions. So instead of asking closed questions, things that can be answered by one word or two words, particularly if you know somebody that wants connection, right? But finds it a little bit more difficult, ask them questions that they need to give you an answer with a sentence or several. So instead of "How was your day?" "Fine," which is how I probably would answer if I was probably in a very isolated headspace, go away type of thing. Try something that engages and invites a little bit more. So, what was the best part of your day? Now I'm just thinking, asking somebody in my family on a bad day, they'd probably say "Jeepers, a guard wouldn't ask me that." But something that you're able to come in for. And I can see this works quite well with children as well, that you're trying to get them to open up and talk a lot more. But it's, we're just grown children. We're all just grown children. All of these things work very well. Research shows that open-ended questions deepen engagement and build stronger social bonds. So try to not have it as a yes or no question, and you'll get probably a little bit more information, and that will give more material to have a conversation around. Validation, reflect. So instead of rushing to fix a problem, reflect back what the person is feeling. So if they seem really frustrated, if they're saying, "I've had a really bad day, everything's going wrong, I'm feeling really isolated, da 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 da," instead of going into problem fix mode, which a lot of us would jump to, give that a little bit of space and just reflect it a little bit. And this might seem very silly, But it has a huge impact on a person insofar as they're going to feel a lot more heard, and like what they've just said is being validated. So if you even just say, that sounds really frustrating, I can't imagine the day you've gone through, it sounds like you're really struggling with this, you basically are just reflecting what you're noticing. This increases emotional connection and trust hugely. And think of yourself being on the flip side of that. If you feel like it's a bit silly to just mirror something back to somebody, I mean, you don't have to say it word for word. In fact, I would really say, please don't do that. But if you've ever had a really tough day, right, and you're saying it to somebody, sometimes even them saying back to you, it sounds like you're really struggling today, is like, oh gosh, yeah, I am actually. Thank you for noticing. So embrace silence. Don't be afraid of them. You don't have to fill every little bit of silence. And sometimes there's something really powerful about allowing pauses in a conversation, particularly if it's after something quite poignant. If somebody said, look, I'm really struggling, allow that to sit in the air for a little while, because naturally what tends to happen is one would want to jump and just allow it to stay there for a while, because what people often do is when they've said the initial thing and no one is jumping in, that's an invitation to give a little bit more information, or just a little bit more about their experience rather than information. So small shifts, like asking deeper questions, being fully present, can transform your kind of run-of-the-mill conversation into something with a little bit more depth. Now, remember, this is for you as well as the other person. Talking is a lot more than words. It's an emotional and psychological regulator. Deep conversations will reduce stress, improve relationships, boost your overall well-being, and our brains are wired for connection. Conversations strengthen those bonds. So it might be one conversation out of your day. It might be the only conversation the other person has had. So having one meaningful conversation per week, and I think I've popped this on that, have I? Start meaningful conversations. Yes, I'm very good. So having one meaningful conversation per week. Now, per day, you might not be able to do that every day, but whether it's with a friend, family member, or colleague, try to notice, or the invitation is there to try to notice opportunities for meaningful conversation. Practice that active listening. Be fully present. Ask those questions. Validate the other person's emotions. And remember, you don't always have to have the answers. You don't have to fix things. You don't have to jump in. You don't always have to give an opinion. Active listening is more about being present with a person. And that, even though it might not seem like a lot, let me tell you from years and years of experience, that's the magic. And there's no other word for it. That's the magic. So reflect on the impact. How do you feel after you've had a meaningful conversation? Does it reduce stress? Does it improve your mood and make you feel more connected? So Brene Brown has a lovely line, which is, connection is why we're here. It gives purpose and meaning to our lives, which is a lovely way to finish up for today's session. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for participating and popping in your comments. It's all very much appreciated. I hope you have a lovely week, and I hope that you found some of this helpful and enjoy your conversations this week. All the best. Oh, last comment. Oh, I'll pop that in on the screen. Remember hearing my parents and families telling stories about their lives or comical events, which I think fire brain's imagination, much like reading a book. It absolutely does. And the stories we tell are the parts of our life. So it's a wonderful way to connect with them. It's a wonderful way to connect with other people. And good storytelling, it used to be an art form for a reason. I'm not good at it. But for those that are, please bring your stories in, because people like me need to hear it, because I'm an absolutely chronic storyteller. Lads, have a lovely rest of your week, and we see you next time. Bye now.